Rescuing threatened landmarks starts with public awareness.
The Hoosier, who's overseen rescuing those Indiana gems for nearly 2 decades, Marsh Davis.
We are often serve as a catalyst for other investment. We want these properties that we save to be meaningful, contributing parts of the communities in which they stand.
Landmarks and historic buildings from across the state.
For decades, every truck international harvester put on the road was designed, developed, and tested at a mid-century building in Fort Wayne. Once considered one of the Midwest's best preserved historic neighborhoods, Richmond's Star Historic District is better known today for its ongoing decline. Since its construction in 1929, the 10-story Hallman building has dominated Evansville's downtown skyline. But the Art Deco skyscraper has been largely vacant for years.
Indiana's endangered historic landmarks and the man behind trying to save them from extinction, what it means to Hoosier communities and the economy, and why it's personal for the man in charge at Indiana Landmarks, Marsh Davis. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Oh, if those walls could talk. And in a way, they do connect with Marsh Davis on a very personal level. Marsh has spent most of his career dedicated as a leader at Indiana Landmarks. He's stepping down soon after spending the past 18 years as president of the organization with a mission to restore, recover, and reimagine some of the most historic, meaningful places in Indiana. And I am pleased to be joined on the podcast this week by Marsh Davis, the longtime president and CEO of Indiana Landmarks, retiring or will be retiring from that position after nearly
18 years as president.
18 years. But Marsh, and your impact on the organization certainly has been felt and will be felt for years to come. Thanks for joining me. How are things?
Good. And always glad to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned you've been serving as CEO since 2006. But prior to that, you were with Indiana Landmarks from 1984 to 2002, really in several roles, field surveyor, director of community services. So historic preservation, Indiana Landmarks in particular, has really been the heart and soul of your career, right?
For the most part, yeah. I took a break to work in Texas for about 4.5 years, but came back here. Glad I made that decision.
Yeah. Talk about Indiana Landmarks because, I think a lot of people are aware of Indiana Landmarks, but maybe not aware of how significant an organization Indiana Landmarks really is, because I believe it's the largest organization of its kind in the entire country.
That's correct. Yeah. I think a lot of people have a vague idea of who we are. I think we're often confused with the Historical Society. There's a big historical society out there that seems to encompass everybody. But we are a statewide nonprofit organization dedicated to historic preservation. And we were founded in 1960 by a group of civic leaders, including Mr. Eli Lilly, who really was the strength behind the organization back in the early days. We didn't do anything for about 5 years. And the organization was worried that Mr. Lilly may lose interest. So they found the Morris Butler House, which was our first project, and right here in the Old North Side. And after about a 4-year restoration, 1969, it was completed. Mr. Lilly was pleased with the results, and he conveyed to the organization over $3 million in Lilly stock, which in today's dollars, what would that be? $18 million? It was a big gift. And for a fledgling preservation organization, it was unheard of. So that was the genesis of us becoming the largest of its kind. But there was a lot more than that. We became a statewide entity once we had the ability to become a professional organization. And that's another thing that sets us apart. We have, in addition to our headquarters here, we have 9 offices around the state.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of the many projects because, as you mentioned, Indiana Landmarks really touches every corner of the state with projects large and small. As you describe, Marsh, Indiana Landmarks, preservation group to be sure, give us Give us the definition of your mission, because it's about historic preservation, but there's so much that connects to, community engagement and revitalization and really changing lives around the state.
Well, part of our mission is we say that we revitalize communities, and that's exactly what we do. We take on look at our work here in the urban neighborhoods of Indianapolis, how we've transformed by investing in properties when nobody else will or few people will. We are often serve as a catalyst for other investment. I think there's a perception among a lot of people that we just go out and buy properties and turn them into museums. That's not what we do. We want to get them back into, if it's an old house, we want it to become a house again if possible. If that doesn't work, we'll find other purposes for it. But we want these properties that we say to be meaningful, contributing parts of the communities in which they stand.
What's the kind of the recipe, or what do you look for when you look at a project to take it on? There's got to be, I assume, a historic nature to it. But what kinds of things are you looking for to restore and preserve here in Indiana?
Well, the obvious things would be architectural or historical significance, which could be a combination of the two. But even with that in mind, there are thousands of properties across the state we could be investing in. But I think where we find the greatest success and the greatest connection is where there is interest in a community, where there's local support and buy-in. And the more we work best, as partners, as opposed to going alone. There have been some times where we've gone into a community when we can't get any support and we take something on. That's not our best effort. It's best when we can either develop support that doesn't exist or work off of existing organizations and community groups.
As you think about some of these projects, because in more than a few cases, I think it's not an easy, when we're trying to preserve a historic structure, there may be competing forces, if you will, whether it's in the business community or whatever the neighborhood, whatever the case might be. Talk about the challenge in some cases in seeing these projects and getting these historic structures saved, if you will. It's not an easy process many times.
No, of course, one of the first things people think about is the sheer cost of it. And that's why these projects can be very challenging with the cost of labor and the cost of materials going up. I mean, everybody knows that's the case. And that's why we often look for subsidies such as historic tax credits, grants, and other programs that will offset the loss. Now, most of those are not available to the average person, but they have been instrumental in some of the larger projects that have been successful. The cost is one of the big challenges. I think there's also a lot of misunderstanding about, we deal with it all the time. I led a tour group last week of very well-educated people, and they've started with the presumption that if your property is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, that you can't touch it, which is, of course, not true at all. There's a confusion between, the honorific National Register listing and then where the protection does come into play is at the local level with a local historic district. So I'm sitting here in the Old North Side. This neighborhood has guidelines that are established by the Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission. That's where there are some restrictions, or people choose to live in a historic district. We've shown that investment in historic districts that are protected is a good investment because property values are strong and solid. But by and large, there's been perhaps a misunderstanding about preservation, that we're a bunch of people that tell you what you can't do with your property. And if I've tried to do anything at Landmarks over these last 18 years, I've really tried hard to change that perception of certainly us as an organization. We try to, as we say, be part of the solution. We don't want to tell you what you can't do. How can we help you make this happen? That's really been something I've worked hard at.
Yeah, I want to talk about some of the projects, the many projects that have come to fruition during your tenure. You mentioned where you sit now at Indiana Landmarks headquarters. That was an interesting project and maybe representative or reflective of the work that Indiana Landmarks does around the state. The former Central Avenue Methodist Episcopal Church was acquired, $24 million restoration. Certainly the Cook family from Bloomington, a key part of that whole process. Talk about, is that, as you reflect on legacy, I guess, and some of the big projects that have taken place, is that at or near the top of the list?
I would say so. Yeah, it's been really great for the organization. This place, you may recall, had been the old Centrum and was really getting run down. And when they basically shut down operations, it wasn't like, oh, let's take on this building to save it. We had been thinking about the idea of, as an organization, wouldn't it be great if we had a really attractive historic building where we could convene large numbers of people? We couldn't do that before. So we already had this idea in our mind that let's start looking for places. And then this old church became available because there was no plan B for it. It was just a wreck. And my board chair at the time thought I was out of my mind. Like, what, you want to take this on? Are you kidding me? But we pursued the idea and cultivated a lot of people. Most importantly, Bill and Gail Cook, who without their generosity, I question whether or not we could have done this. Certainly would not be the building it is today, but it is now. We were able to do it. Bill, we worked with the Cooks over the course of a year to cultivate their interest, and Bill and I shook hands, and he said, "Well, we can do this for $2 million." And it's $24 million later. It's turned out it's been a wonderful thing for Indiana Landmarks, because we bring tens of thousands of people through our doors every year who maybe have no connection to us. They don't know who we are or what preservation is, and they come in here. And when I see that the Grand Hall for the first time, it almost always elicits a very positive, enthusiastic response. So it's been a big outreach program for us, and I also am glad that it has helped retain a lot of cultural activity and energy in the city here, not spreading it out somewhere. I think that's been a good thing as well.
You mentioned the late Bill Cook, his wife Gail, and their involvement in that project, but obviously so many other restoration projects, very large and small around the state. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think kind of hard to overstate the impact that the Cook family has had on your efforts, on Indiana Landmarks efforts around the state of Indiana.
No, in fact, way back in 2013, we hosted the National Historic Preservation Conference. A couple thousand people from all over the country. And I challenged the audience, the opening play. I said, because Gail was our honorary chair, and I said, somebody show me another family that's invested more in historic preservation than the Cook family. I challenge you. And so far, nobody's come up with an answer. So their work at West Baden French Lick, of course, is legendary and always will be. And there will never be another project like that, because there's no place like that. They've just been absolutely phenomenal people. Yeah. And their son Carl he was our board chair in recent years. Can't say enough about their work.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about French Lick, West Baden, and that massive project here in a moment. But a couple of the other projects, kind of to give a smattering, give folks an idea. The reuse of Busch Stadium, a longtime home of the Indianapolis Indians. So that, I'm trying to remember back, was that slated to be torn down when the Indians moved downtown?
I'm not sure if it was slated at that point. Where it really came under fire was when what we now call 16 Tech was in the early stages.
Right.
We didn't call at that, but it was in the crosshairs because it was the biggest piece of land you could develop. So we thought, Mayor Ballard had formed a blue ribbon committee. I was not part of it, but I was invited to participate in the meetings. And I got the sense that people on that committee didn't want to see just science and laboratories. They wanted to see more of a community. So John Watson, who'd been our board chair in the past, had a very creative plan to redevelop that. He pulled that off the shelf. We met with the community group, and they liked it. And that's so John, Landmarks then acquired the property and then conveyed it to John Watson and his team to turn it into what it is today. It's a very creative, adaptive use. I mean, I have to be honest, some of our preservation purists thought it was a little bit extreme. I thought it was great. I thought a wonderful reuse of the building, and it was sold out. The units were sold out before it even opened. Great success.
Yeah, residential property there, right? And 16 Tech continues to grow after years of planning and thought and those types of things. You mentioned the 16 Tech development, but I know there are other examples. Do you find yourself, or have you found yourself at odds, if you will, with the business community, with those who are looking to develop property for commercial purposes versus the historic preservation piece? I'm sure there's a give and take and negotiating that goes. How difficult is that piece of the equation?
Well, it can be fairly difficult. We like, however, I think we've had success in some really wonderful redevelopments. And you look at here in Indianapolis, I mean, the bottle works, what they've done there, that could have all been scraped, but by preserving it is really revitalized. And perhaps even more dramatically, I don't know if you've been up to the electric works in Fort Wayne.
Yes. Yep.
Massive adaptive use of the General Electric plant. And so we try to find those projects and connect developers with them to find a useful and sustainable use for them. That's a key thing. Sustainable use for these historic properties is sometimes challenging. Another example, one of my favorite projects was down in Evansville. There was the wonderful Greyhound bus depot, and it was been vacant for years. It took a long time. The city finally conveyed ownership to Indiana Landmarks, but we were thinking, okay, what are we going to do with this place? Well, we'll make it some kind of nonprofit thing, and we can raise money from the foundations and so forth. And then I said, no, what does Evansville need? It needs a restaurant downtown. So we started courting restaurateurs around the region, and ultimately connected with Mike Cunningham, and it's now a Brew Burger, and a very, very successful Brew Burger. I know it's helped revitalize that part of downtown Evansville. It's packed every day, and it's just a great reuse for that building.
Yeah, and I'm sure you would argue that the historic piece of these developments, you mentioned Bottle Works and Electric Works as two examples, kind of focusing in sticking with that historic piece probably adds to the development and the allure, the success of the development once it's finished, to have that character and that flavor.
Yeah, I think people they like just the looks of it without any knowledge of the history or architecture. There's something inherently appealing about old buildings. Look at the parts of Mass Avenue, for instance, here in Indianapolis that are the most attractive. It's where you have this mixture of not outstanding landmarks in and of themselves, but you have these small buildings that form kind of a tapestry and a variety that in a human scale that people relate to.
Yeah. You mentioned projects in Fort Wayne and Evansville and Indianapolis, again, very much a statewide organization. You mentioned one of your favorites is the restoration there of your headquarters, the Indiana Landmark Center. Any other projects that stick out to you during your tenure?
Well, one I'm still involved with. This was a project that right at the end of my tenure before leaving for Texas was the Lyle Station School down in Southwest Indiana. It's a profoundly important place. It's the last surviving Black farming community, and the chief landmark there was the school, and the school was falling into ruin. And we took years and years of work and a lot of help from the USDA over time, but we finally got the money to rehabilitate that. And it's a thriving community center, historic museum. Students come there to experience life as it was in the 1920s in a school. It's just a profoundly important place. And it's now linked with the African American Museum in the Smithsonian in Washington.
Wow.
So it's kind of out of the way, it's down, really, it's northwest of Princeton.
Yeah.
The back roads, but it's a destination worthy of the trip. But it just was one of the most important projects that I've had the privilege of being involved with. And we still have a strong relationship with the Lyle Station.
And probably no better example of the statewide nature of Indiana Landmarks than that project. Maybe, some of the projects we've talked about get a lot of attention, the big high profile projects, but Indiana Landmarks, and certainly under your tenure, it has had an impact in some of the smallest nook and cranny communities around the state.
Yeah, and we take on lots of properties that nobody is aware of. Old houses in a community that may be a key part of a neighborhood, stuff that nobody else would touch because it maybe doesn't make sense economically. And to be honest, we often incur a loss on these projects because we're doing stuff nobody else would. If the market would bear it, well, somebody else would do it and make money on it. But when that doesn't pencil out, that's when we step in many cases. And that's why we are, a charitable foundation, a public charity. We ask people to support our work through tax-deductible gifts.
Much more ahead with Marsh Davis, the retiring CEO at Indiana Landmarks. Talk about that big French Lick West Baden project, how that came together, maybe how Marsh got interested in historic preservation when the Business and Beyond podcast returns.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
And welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is Marsh Davis, the retiring CEO at Indiana Landmarks, an organization, the largest of its kind in the country, and an organization that continues to connect and engage with projects and communities all over the state of Indiana. And Marsh, when you look at big projects, the one I think about is a huge project in a small community, and that's the restoration and what has transformed French Lick and West Baden, those one-time high-profile resorts back in the 20s had fallen into disrepair and is now obviously has a second life, if you will. Talk about how substantial that project, because I remember going down there as a reporter many years ago, and literally West Baden was falling in on itself. And to think that it could be restored into what it is now is, to me, is remarkable.
Well, it's unbelievable what the Cook family did. But before the Cook stepped in, the building, as you say, was falling in. It was a ruin. We're becoming that fast. The outer walls were collapsing, and Indiana Landmarks, then Historic Landmarks Foundation, under the leadership of Reed Williamson, thought we've got to do something to prevent this from collapsing. So we started to raise money. We bought it. That was the first step. It was a pretty gutsy thing to do, to buy a property like that for about $250,000, I think. This is West Baden, not French Lick. And without an exit strategy, just this thing is too important to lose. So Reed Williamson started to raise money in southern Indiana, rather small amount of money considering what the task was ahead. But he met with the Cook people, and they said, "Man, you're not asking for enough money. It's going to take way more than that." So that's how they got involved to help stabilize it. And then you got more and more interested in it. I think Bill Cook, he had the vision for doing something really large in southern Indiana, and it captured his imagination. So during our time of ownership, he invested in restoring the famous, we call it the atrium, the area under the dome, but not the outer rooms yet, the hotel room. So just that dome was preserved to try to attract interest. And then I'll try to keep this short, but the effort to create a casino there, it took legislation, it took a lot of community support, a lot of activity at the State House. The Cooks got more and more engaged, more interested. And then finally we gave them the building. They embarked on a full-scale restoration. Meanwhile, then they bought French Lick and transformed that. And now the golf courses, and you're talking about $500 million a year investment in the Springs Valley towns of French Lick and West Baden. And you talk about transformational. I mean, it is a world-class destination.
Yeah, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say that saved that community, that area, because without this, who knows what things would be like there now. Absolutely. And that's, that, and the Cook family have a habit of doing that kind of thing. And when Bill Cook's hometown in Illinois, which had fallen hard times, they put a plant there and they invested in the downtown. They transformed it. Even downtown Bloomington, all the investments they made around the courthouse square and elsewhere have really transformed that town. But they see the value of historic preservation. And Bill would always say, to us, this was the headquarters we have here, the Indiana Landmark Center.
Bill kind of stepped in, and this was his project. And we stood back and let all the people that worked on French Lick and West Baden worked on the Indiana Landmark Center, the decorative artists, the plumbers, everybody. And we had 8:00 construction meetings every Tuesday, and Bill Cook was here every Tuesday at 7:30, and you were not late for it. But he had the kind of drive, and I think that this project was similar to the others, but it gave him a lot of energy and a purpose. And he, of course, very ill the time we did the Landmark Center, and sometimes I could see he was in such pain, but he was here and hands-on. And of course, he died the night before we had the grand opening.
Yeah. What got Marsh Davis interested in historic preservation? Was this something you've always, had a passion for, or where did it stem from?
Well, I had no knowledge of historic preservation, but I was a history student at Butler, and I had some courses in history that delved a lot into art history and a lot of architecture. That was interesting stuff, but I still didn't know that you could do anything with it. And then when I graduated from Butler without having a real strong direction ahead of me, I learned that you could get a degree in this thing called historic preservation. The National Trust for Historic Preservation used to publish in their long gone tabloid a list of all the programs around the country where you could get degrees. So I started to look into it. I went up to Ball State and I looked at that program. I thought, I'll leave Ball State. So I went out east to Columbia, Boston, New Orleans had a program. So I ended up going come back to Indiana and go to Ball State. It makes sense. So I spent 2 years up there, got a master's degree in preservation. But the most important part of that was getting an internship with Historic Landmarks Foundation of Indiana. So I had that early connection doing a lot of what we might call gopher work, but I loved being part of an active organization at that time. So that's really how I got started, and didn't stray too far from it.
Yeah. As you look at your, there are so many things you can point to, I think, but as you think about your legacy of leadership there at Indiana Landmarks, what do you think, what would you like it to be?
Well, as I said earlier, I want people to see us as an organization that is positive and solves problems and helps to work to revitalize neighborhoods and communities, to help build things, and not as a preventative or restrictive organization. And there is some criticism that's well-deserved, because historic preservation over time has been, I think, certainly been perceived as a regulatory thing. The previous president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, she came on and said, I come from a different world, and we see the preservation movement as the movement of no. And so I'd like to think that part of the legacy I leave here is an organization that has tried to find positive solutions, tried to work with people, not against them. But also, there are things that in any organization, company or nonprofit, that you care about. And that is the financial well-being. During my time, we've had 2 amazingly successful capital campaigns. We just wrapped one up at the end of 2023. We had started with a goal of $14 million, and we surpassed $36 million. I know for a university, that's not a big deal, but for a historic preservation organization, that's not bad. So I feel that I'm leaving the organization while it's at a point of great strength. We have a wonderful staff, a lot of continuity with people that have been here way longer than I have, and they're not going anywhere because they see the quality of what we do, and an excellent board of directors. So whoever gets my job, I envy them, because they're stepping into something good.
Yeah, well, you still got a few more months. I know will officially step down next April, but Marsh Davis, really appreciate you taking the time to chat on the podcast, and in particular, appreciate everything you've done for Indianapolis and the state of Indiana, because it is substantial and it makes Indiana a better place as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Gary.
All right. And thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. We're a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. You can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.